5 years had passed. The Tavares family now officially included 4 siblings, 15 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. Every summer, they gathered half in São Paulo, half in Minas Gerais, alternating. The wooden box containing Helena's letters is hidden away in a special place in Marcia's house, a private memorial to unrequited love, mistakes made, and forgiveness sought too late. But something beautiful was born from the deathbed, that name that no one followed. A fragmented family had been reconstituted. Buried secrets had come to light. It was a difficult, but necessary truth that had been confronted. At their last family gathering, the 4 siblings visited the graves together, first Antonio's, then Helena's, more than 300 kilometers away. In that small cemetery in Minas Gerais, in front of Helena Maria Costa's simple tombstone, Miguel placed a photograph. It was the photograph that had been in the box of Helena and Antônio as young people holding hands in the summer of 1963. "Here it is, Mom," he said softly. "The love you've been waiting for, in a different way. Your family finally complete." The wind blew gently through the trees, and for a moment, everyone felt as if something had calmed down, as if a restless spirit had finally found rest. Helena had waited for Antônio in life. Antônio had burdened Helena with guilt. And in the end, in death, the two were united by memory, by forgiveness, and by the children and grandchildren who now carried them both in their hearts. On his deathbed, Antônio uttered a name that no one knew. But that name changed everything. That name revealed truths, healed wounds, built bridges. And perhaps, just perhaps, it allowed 2 tormented souls to finally find peace. One in remembrance, the other in forgiveness, both in a love that, despite everything, never truly died. The heart monitor beeped regularly in room 304 of São Lucas Hospital. It was a Sunday afternoon, one of those when time seems to stand still, and the Tavares family was gathered around the bed where Antônio Tavares, the 82-year-old patriarch, was fighting his last moments of life. But nobody was prepared for what was about to happen. Marcia, the eldest daughter, held her father's wrinkled hand, trying to hold back the tears that insisted on falling. Roberto, the middle son, leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, his face a mask of restraint. And Julia, the youngest, sat in the corner, looking at her father as if she still hoped for a miracle. Antônio had been a reserved man his entire life. He had worked as an accountant in a modest firm, married Dora at 25, and raised 3 children with difficulty but also with quiet love. I never spoke much about his past, about his childhood in the countryside, about the years before he met his wife. It was as if his life had only begun when he started a family. And now, there he was, his eyes half closed, his breathing weak and uneven, his lips moving in an inaudible whisper. The doctor had been clear. It was a matter of hours, maybe minutes. Suddenly, Antônio opened his eyes. Not the tired, dull eyes of the last few months, but vivid, almost feverish eyes, as if a last flame of life had been rekindled within him. His fingers gripped Marcia's hand with surprising force. "Dad?" she said, leaning forward. "Dad, we're here." Antônio's lips trembled. He tried to speak, but only a hoarse message came out. Marcia moved her ear away from her father's mouth. And then he said, with a clearly disturbing expression, "Helena, Helena. Forgive me." The name echoed in the room like a gunshot. Marcia was late, pale. Roberto moved immediately. "What did he say?" He asked forgiveness from someone named Helena," Marcia replied, her voice trembling. "Helena," Julia declared. "Who is Helena?" None of them knew that name. Antônio had never mentioned a Helena. There were no cousins, aunts, friends, or acquaintances with that name in the family. It was as if he had summoned a ghost. Antônio closed his eyes again, his breathing becoming more labored. The 3 children exchanged glances, a mixture of confusion and something else. An unsettling feeling that perhaps they didn't know their own father as well as they thought. 5 minutes later, the heart monitor emitted a long, continuous sound. Antônio Tavares had left, and with him he took the secret of who Helena was. The funeral was a quiet affair, attended by a few friends and some old colleagues. Dora had passed away 3 years earlier, a victim of Alzheimer's, and Antonio had since become even more reclusive. Their children, each immersed in their own lives, visited them on Sundays, fulfilling a family obligation that had recently transcended mere protocol. But that name, Helena, became a silent obsession among the 3 siblings. The week after the funeral, Marcia, Roberto, and Julia gathered at their father's house to begin the difficult task of organizing his belongings. The house, a simple building in a quiet neighborhood of São Paulo, was frozen in time. Furniture from the 1980s, faded photographs on the walls, the characteristic smell of mothballs, and old books. "We need to talk about this," Julia said, breaking the silence as she stacked boxes in the living room. "About what Dad said." "Julia, he was dying," Roberto retorted without looking at her. "People get delirious at the end. It could have been anything." "But it was nothing," Marcia interjected, sitting down on the old sofa. "You saw his eyes. He was lucid at that moment. And he asked for forgiveness. That means something." Roberto sighed, running a hand through his gray hair. "Okay, let's suppose it's important. What do you want to do? Hire a private investigator to find out who Helena is? That's ridiculous." "It's not ridiculous if there was something in Dad's life that he carried like a burden until the very last second," Julia said, her voice firm. "He deserves for us to find out. Maybe someone needs to know that he asked for forgiveness." Marcia nodded. "Let's search. There must be something in this house. Letters, documents, old photos. If there was an important Helena in his life, there will be some trace of her." And so the search began. They spent days searching through every room. Drawers, closets, boxes in the dusty basement. They found old work documents, birth certificates, family photographs, but nothing that mentioned a Helena. It was Julia who found it. In the attic, inside a worn leather suitcase, under old mattresses and magazines from the 1960s, there was a small wooden box. It was locked. "Roberto, Marcia, come here." The 3 knelt around the box. Roberto forced the lock with a screwdriver and, with a click, it opened. Inside there were letters, dozens of them, yellowed with age, tied together with faded red string. And on top of them all, a black and white photograph. Marcia took a picture with trembling hands. It was a picture of a young man, clearly his father, no more than 20 years old, next to a beautiful young woman with long hair and a shy smile. They were holding hands. On the back of the photo, in delicate handwriting, was written, "Antonio and Helena, summer of 1963. The silence that was broken was reassuring." Julia was the first to pick up one of the letters. She carefully untied the string and opened the yellowed envelope. The letter was handwritten, in the same handwriting as in the photograph. She began to read aloud. "My dear Antonio, 3 weeks have passed since you left for São Paulo, and each day seems longer than the last. The city here is the same, but without you, everything has lost its color. Mom asks me every day when you're coming back, and I don't know what to answer. You promised you'd return, that I'd come for you, that we'd build our life together. I'm waiting, my love. I'll always be waiting, with all my heart. Helena." Julia stopped reading. Her voice choked with emotion. Tears streamed down her face. He abandoned her," she whispered. Marcia picked up another letter and then another. We all followed the same tone. Hope, then anxiety, then despair. Helena wrote for over a year, hoping that Antonio would keep his promise. But he never returned. The last letter was different. Shorter, colder. "Antonio, this will be my last letter. I realize you've made your choice and it's not me. I don't know what happened, why you changed, why you left me here waiting like a fool. I hope you are happy with the life you chose. I tried to be happy too in some way. I'm not going to wait any longer. Helena." Date: March 15, 1965. Roberto found documents at the bottom of the box. Old telegrams, a train ticket to São Paulo dated June 1963, and a yellow newspaper clipping. He carefully unfolded the paper. It was an obituary. Small, simple. Helena Maria Costa passed away on August 8, 1967, at the age of 24, due to complications during childbirth. She leaves behind a son, Miguel Costa. The wake and burial will take place in the city of Santa Rita do Sapucaí, Minas Gerais. The air seems to be sucked out of the attic. She died, Marcia whispered, her hand over her mouth. She died young, alone with a child. A child that could be Dad's, Julia added, looking at her siblings with wide eyes. Roberto shook his head, trying to process it. Wait, are you saying we have a brother? That Dad had a child with this Helena and abandoned him? We don't know if he knew, Marcia argued, but her voice lacked a conclusion. Maybe she never told him. Or maybe he did, and he chose to run away. Julia interrupted, bitterness evident in her voice. That's why he carried that guilt to the end. He abandoned her while she was pregnant. The three remained silent, the weight of that revelation crushing any illusions they had about the man they had known as their father. We need to find Miguel, Marcia finally said. If he's alive, he deserves to know. He deserves to know that, in the end, our father thought of her, that he asked for forgiveness. The search for Miguel Costa proved more difficult than they had imagined. Santa Rita do Sapucaí was a small town in southern Minas Gerais, but decades ago, people moved away, died, disappeared. Marcia hired a private investigator, a man named Campos, who specialized in finding people. Took 3 weeks, but he finally called with news. I found a Miguel Costa who fit the profile, said Campos. He's 58 years old, works as a history teacher at a public school in Pouso Alegre, raised by his maternal grandmother after his mother's death. I never knew his father. Marcia's heart raced. Are you sure it's him? We can never be absolutely certain without DNA testing, but all the data and information match up. And he lives just an hour from Santa Rita do Sapucaí. The three brothers planned to take a trip together. It was a Saturday morning when they hit the road to Minas Gerais, each lost in their own thoughts. What are we going to tell him? Julia asked, breaking the silence. The truth, Marcia replied. He deserves the truth. Miguel Costa was a man of simple appearance. Gray hair, thin-rimmed glasses, a gentle smile when he opened the door of his modest home. When Marcia explained who she was and why they were there, the smile disappeared, replaced by an expression that was a mixture of shock, confusion, and something deeper, perhaps a breakup. He met them to go inside. The house was cozy, filled with books and photographs of students. Miguel lived alone for many years after his wife's death, dedicating himself to teaching. Seated in the small room, Marcia handed him the wooden box. This is passed down to our father. We believe he was your father too. Miguel opened the box with trembling hands. His eyes filled with tears when he saw the photograph. My mother, he whispered, running his fingers over the image. She never talked much about him. I just thought he was a good man who had to leave, and that she didn't blame him. She wrote letters, Julia said gently. Many letters. She loved him. Miguel began to read the letters, one by one, tears streaming silently down his face. When he finished, he remained silent for long minutes. My grandmother raised me, he finally said. She never spoke ill of the man who abandoned my mother, but she also never forgave him. She said he was a coward who chose an easy life instead of honoring his responsibilities. Roberto lowered his head, ashamed. We are very sorry. We knew nothing about this. Miguel looked at them, and in his eyes there was a mixture of emotions impossible to decipher. You know what's funny? He said with a sad smile. I always wanted to meet my father. I always imagined who he was, what it would be like to have him in my life. And now I've discovered that he lived just a few hours away all these years, built a family, had children, and never came looking for me. The silence was heavy. But he remembered her at the end, Marcia said softly. In his last words, he asked Helena for forgiveness. He carried that burden his whole life. Miguel nodded slowly. Remorse is not the same as courage, he said. But I suppose it is something. The four of them talked for hours. Miguel spoke about his life, about how he grew up listening to stories about his grandmother's mother, about how he became a teacher to honor her memory. He spoke about his deceased wife, about his own grown children, about a life that was built despite the absence of a father. And Marcia, Roberto, and Julia told them about Antonio, the man they knew, stern but present, hardworking, quiet, a man who, apparently, had fled his past and built a new life on the ruins of broken promises. "Do you know why he left?" Miguel asked. "Why did he leave?" None of them had an answer. There were no diaries, no confessions. Only Helena's letters and Antonio's silence. "My grandmother once said something," Miguel continued. "She said that my mother got pregnant and sent a telegram to him in Sao Paulo. He never replied. Simply absent." Julia covered her face with her hands. "He was a coward," she said, her voice muffled. "Our father was a coward. Or he was scared," Marcia pondered. In the 60s, getting a girl pregnant out of wedlock was a scandal. Maybe he panicked. "That doesn't justify it," Roberto said firmly. "Nothing justifies abandoning a pregnant woman." Miguel found it with his head. "No, it doesn't justify it. But perhaps it explains the weight he carried. Perhaps it explains why, in the end, when all the masks fall and only the truth remains, he called for it." Before they left, Miguel took them to the cemetery where Helena was buried. It was a small, peaceful place, with old trees and simple tombstones. Helena's gravestone was modest. Helena Maria Costa, 1943 to 1967, beloved mother, forever remembered. The four stood there, before the stone that held the remains of a woman who had loved and been abandoned, who had waited and given up, who had died too young, leaving behind a fatherless son and an unfinished love story. Marcia placed fresh flowers on the tombstone. "He asked for forgiveness, Helena," she whispered. "I hope that, wherever you are now, you can hear him." Miguel placed his hand on her shoulder. "Thank you for coming. For all I care, do this. The truth hurts, but it's better than silence." On the way back to Sao Paulo, the three brothers barely spoke. Each was processing in their own way what they had discovered, what they knew about the man they called father. "Shall we include him?" Julia said suddenly. "Miguel. In the inheritance, without a family name." Marcia and Roberto exchanged glances. "Yes," Marcia said without hesitation. "He's our brother. And he deserves everything our other children deserved, even if belatedly." "Roberto, Dad never gave him what he deserved. At least now we can agree on that." And so it was done. In the following months, Miguel was officially recognized as Antonio Tavares' son. The inheritance was divided equally among the four. And more than that, the brothers began to build a real relationship, visiting each other, getting to know each other's children, piecing together the threads of a family that had been broken decades earlier by an act of cowardice. A year later, on a cloudy day, the four brothers gathered at the Sao Paulo cemetery where Antonio was buried. They had commissioned a new plaque, adding something that was missing. Antonio Tavares, 1942 to 2024, father of Marcia, Roberto, Julia, and Miguel. May he find the peace he sought. Miguel stared at the tombstone for a long time. "You know," he said finally, "I've spent my whole life angry at a ghost, at a father I never knew who never wanted me. But now, after all this, I only feel sadness. Sadness for him, for my mother, for everything that could have been and wasn't." "Do you forgive him?" Julia asked gently. Miguel thought for a moment. "I don't know if forgiveness is the right word, but what I understood was that he was human, flawed, and scared. And perhaps, in the end, he carried more guilt than any external punishment could have given him." Marcia linked her arm with his. "Helena would be proud of the man you've become. Despite everything, despite her absence, you are proof that her love was not in vain." That night, back home, Julia was leafing through old letters when she noticed something. One of the letters had a different weight. She opened it and found another folded piece of paper inside. It wasn't Helena's handwriting. It belonged to Antonio. One letter was never sent. It was addressed to Helena, dated January 1964, 2 months before she wrote her last letter. With trembling hands, Julia began to read. My dear Helena, I don't have the courage to send this letter. I don't have the courage to go back. I'm a coward, I know that. When I received your telegram saying you were expecting my child, I panicked. I had just gotten a job here. I had expectations of a better life. And I was afraid. Afraid of coming back and not being able to support you. Afraid of judgment. Afraid of failing as a father. I met a woman here, Dora. She's good, stable, secure. And I chose the easy way out. I chose security instead of love. I chose cowardice instead of honor. But not a day goes by that I don't think about you, about our son. Not a day goes by that I don't hate myself for it. I don't deserve your forgiveness. But wherever our son is, I hope he has the strength and security that you have. I hope he never becomes the coward I have become. I'm sorry, Helena. I'm sorry for everything. Forever in debt. Antonio. Julia cried as she read. She cried for the father who never had the courage to send the letter, for the woman who died without ever knowing that, in some tortuous way, she was still loved, for the son who grew up without a father despite having one so close. She called Miguel that same night and read the letter to him over the phone. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Thank you for sharing this with me, Miguel finally said, his voice choked with emotion. It doesn't change what happened. It doesn't turn off the pain. But it helps to understand. Can I ask you something? Julia said hesitantly. Sure. You have children, grandchildren. Do they know about this story? Miguel chuckled softly. Yes, they know. And do you know what my oldest son told me when I told him everything? He said, Dad, you break the cycle. You were there. You thought it was different. And I think that's what matters in the end. We can't change the past, but we can choose how it shapes us.